Originali.
Bentornati a Lingue Originali, in particolare all'appuntamento con la lingua inglese con Marco Piovaz su Caffè Italia. Come sempre, per l'introduzione in italiano, la voce, la mia, quella di Dario Albertini. Se ricordate, tempo fa vi abbiamo proposto Miss Fozzard Finds Her, un altro dei monologhi di Alan Bennett tratti dalla raccolta Talking Heads, che ormai chi segue Lingue Originali conosce abbastanza. Ebbene, sullo stesso genere, quello della ricerca di se stessa da parte di una donna, c'è il monologo che cominciamo a proporvi in questa puntata e lo faremo in 3 parti. Si intitola Nights in the Gardens of Spain, le notti nei giardini di Spagna, e la protagonista è una donna molto molto timida. Vedete che nei monologhi di Alan Bennett la figura femminile è centrale, altrettanto lo è nella trasposizione televisiva che ne ha fatto negli anni '80 la BBC. Ebbene, questo Nights in the Gardens of Spain, sappiate che è uno dei monologhi che è stato più apprezzato, tanto in teatro quanto nella sua versione televisiva. Ne parleremo ancora nel corso dei prossimi 2 episodi. Intanto ascoltiamo dalla voce di Marco Piovaz la prima parte. Vi ricordo il titolo di Alan Bennett dalla raccolta Talking Heads, Nights in the Gardens of Spain.
Nobody normally gets killed round here. They're mostly detached houses, and you never even hear shouting. So it took me a minute to tipple to what she was saying. I said, "Dad, is it a heart attack?" She said, "Oh no, nothing like that. Just look at me. I'm in my bare feet." I really only know her to not to, but they have a lovely magnolia, so once when she was in the garden, I called out, "You've had more luck with your magnolia grandiflora than I have." But she just smiled and said yes, and since I didn't have another remark up my sleeve ready, that was the end of that. I do that all the time, start a conversation, but can't keep it going. Blondish woman, a bit washed out looking. Nice, tight sort of face. Anyway, she comes out into the road and waits for me to get to the gate and says, "I know I don't really know you, only there's something wrong with Mr. McCorkadale." I was actually rushing because I'd planned on getting the 5 to 9 and going into Sainsbury's, but anyway, I went in. I said, "Has he been poorly?" She said, "No, I've a feeling he's dead. Come through." "Only, Mrs. Horrocks, he doesn't have any trousers on." I said, "Well, I do a stint at the hospice twice a week. That's not a problem. Only, to be fair, I just take the trolley round. I've never actually been there when anybody is going, and they think I'm not really ready to administer the consolation yet." She had a nice linen dress on, very simple. I think she might have been drinking. He was lying on his back on the rug, one of those fleecy hairy things with blood and whatnot coming from somewhere behind his head. And it's awful because the first thing I thought was, well, she'll never get that out. He had on these green Y-fronty things, which I'd have thought were a bit young for someone who's retired. But Henry's the same. Suddenly takes it into his head to go in for something he thinks is a bit more dashing. Little Tyrolean socks. I said, "Should I touch him?" She said, "Well, you can if you want, but he is dead. I've been sitting here looking at him for an hour." I said, "His pants are on back to front." She said, "Oh, that's me. I thought I'd better put them on before I fetched somebody in." He had a little tattoo not far from his belly button, And I remember when they moved in, Henry said he thought he had something to do with vending machines. I said, "Did he bang his head, do you think?" She said, "Oh no, I shot him. I've put the gun away." And she opens the sideboard drawer, and there it is, with the table mats and playing cards. He had a gun because he'd been in Malaya, apparently. My first thought was to ring Henry and ask what to do, but I couldn't face the fuss. I was still a bit nervous of calling 999, because I'm never sure what constitutes an emergency. Anyway, I thought if she'd waited an hour already, I might as well get her a cup of tea first. And as I was running the tap, I called out, "The police haven't already been, have they?" She said, "No, why?" I said, "Nothing." Only there was a pair of handcuffs on the draining board. The policeman had some difficulty writing. Big boy, nice ears, spelling all over the place. When I asked him what he thought had happened, he said, "Well, it's marriage, isn't it? The stresses and strains of." Though we don't normally expect it with oldish people, they've generally got it out of their system by then. And it's a bit early in the day. People seem to like to get breakfast out of the way before the shooting starts. I'm just signing my statement when Henry arrives back and, of course, prolongs the process. "I don't know that Mr. Horrocks quite means this, officer. What you said to me on the phone, young lady, was..." I said, "Henry, you weren't there." The policeman winks and says, "Now then, we don't want another shooting match, do we?" I mean, at first, Henry didn't even know who they were. He said, "Not the Chow?" I said, "No, that's the Broadbents." Anyway, he sits about for a bit, whistling under his breath, then goes upstairs and attacks his computer. After the policeman had gone, I went up and apologized and asked Henry whether he thought anything had been going on. He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, she didn't have anything on under that linen dress." Of course, any suggestion of that embarrasses Henry. He's such an innocent. He said, "Rosemary, I don't know what sort of world you think you're living in, but there's probably some perfectly reasonable explanation. In the meantime, let's just remember that somebody has died. I'm only sorry that you had to be the one who was passing, because I would have preferred you not to have been involved." I went out later to get some milk at the garage, and there were still 1 or 2 reporters outside number 17, a whole branch of the magnolia broken off. One of them said, "Are you a neighbour? Did you know the McCorkerdales?" I shook my head, and I didn't say anything, so one of them shouts after me, "You owe it to the community." So I turned round and said, "Yes, and you owe it to the community not to break branches of people's magnolia trees." And of course, that's just the point where the photographer takes a picture, and it's in the paper this morning, with me looking like a mad woman, and the caption, "The real face of suburbia." Whereas the real face of suburbia was Henry's when he saw it. I woke up in the night, and I could hear him whistling under his breath. I said, "Are you thinking about Mrs. McCorkerdale?" He said, "No, I was thinking about the house. Prices are down as it is, and something like this isn't going to help matters." He reached over from his bed and took my hand. "You must try not to be upset, but if we don't get at least 175, we shall have to kiss goodbye to Marbella." I keep wondering if I ought to have told somebody about the handcuffs.
A Lingue Originali, Marco Piovaz ha letto per voi in lingua inglese. Lo ritroveremo su Caffè Italia la prossima settimana, venerdì, sempre alle ore 22. Ma Lingue Originali è in onda anche il sabato con Nadia Meroni, con la lettura in lingua tedesca, e la domenica con Barbara Marchand, per quella, in lingua francese. Vi ringraziamo per l'ascolto e vi diamo appuntamento a Lingue Originali fra 7 giorni, sempre su Caffè Italia, la radio e il podcast dall'aroma italiano e non solo.
Lingue Originali.